Welcome back to the deep dive. So you've brought us a really unique set of sources this time.
They're not what you'd call a standard history, that's for sure.
Not at all. They read less like, official archives and more like the sound of final desperate confessions being whispered into the dust of an empty room.
An empty vault, to be precise.
Right. And our mission today is, well, it's a forensic examination of absolute secrecy. We are diving deep into the history of the Order of the Djinn.
A history that was never meant to be known.
Exactly. It was so fiercely protected that the only reason we even have these records is because its final chronicler, Djinn, tells us straight up that the very act of speaking this story was a sin of the highest order.
Punishable by death.
Punishable by death.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a society dedicated to protecting the world, but through this really unique and painful mandate, making sure the world forgot that they and the catastrophic powers they were guarding ever even existed.
And that's the key. What we have here isn't a narrative of triumph. It's a detailed, almost agonizing autopsy of inevitable failure.
An autopsy, that's a good word for it.
We aren't reading the victorious scrolls of some long-standing organization. We're sifting through fragments, cryptic epitaphs, death notices, really, and personal accounts that document these moments of high operational tension.
An immense human sacrifice.
Immense, and ultimately total institutional collapse. This deep dive is about understanding forensically how a system built on absolute silence fails and, what devastating emotional and strategic price was paid by the few people who had to enforce it.
So our mission then is to weave these disparate pieces together.
Right. We're going to integrate the deeply personal confessions of the last guardian, Djinn with these tragic, itemized operational records of their fallen members.
The goal is to construct a comprehensive, emotionally charged narrative. Something that traces the Order's rise, the incredible psychological burden of its rules, and the exact painful circumstances of its final collapse.
We're looking for the precise moments where duty met doom.
Okay, let's unpack that core doctrine of secrecy first, because it feels like the philosophical foundation for every single tragic event that follows.
It absolutely is.
We start with Djinn confession. And the weight of that secrecy is just. It's almost crushing to read. Djinn finds it so strange to tell someone this story.
Well, of course, because that simple act, just communicating.
Yeah, that simple act of communication would have been a sin of the highest order, punishable by death. That one line immediately defines the sheer intensity of the Order's internal culture.
It's not just concealment. This is something else entirely.
Right. Their mandate wasn't just hiding, it was total erasure from historical and public consciousness. They were aiming for complete oblivion for themselves.
And Djinn gives us the motivation for that, doesn't she?
She does. She says outsiders do not know the importance of what we did. The implicit and really brutal belief there is that ignorance. Absolute ignorance is the only sustainable safeguard for humanity.
The second that knowledge leaves the forbidden vault.
The world is compromised. It's in immediate jeopardy.
What's so fascinating here is the core paradox that's just baked into their existence. They believed this absolute harshness, this policy of mandatory silence backed by immediate execution,
It was the only way.
the only way to protect the people of Rayclast from themselves. And we have to remember, Rayclast is a land of constantly resurfacing ancient evils and shattered empires. Their primary mission was fundamentally inward-looking.
Guarding against human folly.
Exactly. Ambition, temptation, the draw of immense power. They weren't fighting external armies, not primarily. They were fighting human nature.
And we can identify the specific threats, right? The things that made this extreme secrecy necessary.
We can. They were guarding artifacts of great power, and the sources specifically name the Horns of Kulamak as a key example.
The emphasis is that these powers are so great that to use them would put the world in jeopardy.
Right. The Order recognized that power, once it's known, will inevitably be sought after. It'll be misused. It's a guarantee.
So it's a complete deliberate rejection of world leadership, isn't it? I mean, most secret societies, they want to control the world from the shadows, be the masters pulling the strings. The Order of the Djinn chose the exact opposite path. They existed purely to keep the power sealed away in secret, even from the very people they were sworn to protect.
Their fundamental decision, and you can see it in the text, was that better that the world forget that it, and we exist, than fight for control of a power they have no hope of controlling.
That's an unbelievable level of self-abnegation, of pure duty, enforced over countless generations. They literally chose invisibility over influence.
And this centuries-long duty, it had a physical center, a single location,
The Forbidden Vault.
the Forbidden Vault. But June Ortoy identifies it, and in the present tense of the confession, the description is just.
Right.
It's heartbreaking. June says, "This dusty pit was once the Forbidden Vault, and I its guardian."
That shift in description, from this imposing sacred site to just this dusty pit, it tells you everything.
It immediately implies the current ruinous status of their mission. It's over. The structure is either destroyed, the objects are gone, or, and this is maybe the worst of all, the secret is out.
We have to pause on that contrast. Just imagine the weight of protecting the most dangerous secrets in existence within a place called the Forbidden Vault, a name that just screams sanctity and forbidden strength.
Yeah.
And then to look at it and just see a dusty pit, it speaks to total, complete functional ruin.
It does, and the status of the mission is brutally confirmed by June's own survival. She says, "I say us. In truth, it is just me left."
Wow.
The very fact that June's alive and is speaking these secrets is the definitive, tragic confirmation of the Order's absolute failure. The entire structure, the centuries of mandated silence, have completely collapsed.
So the sole survivor is forced to break the highest vow.
Because there's no one left to punish the sin, and the silence has just become futile.
So the most dangerous information in the world, the Order's existence, its mission, its failures, it's all being spoken openly now. Not because of some act of betrayal, but out of sheer desperate necessity born from total extinction.
They died to keep the secret.
Only to have the last surviving member realize the only thing left to do is tell the tale.
So if that core duty was erasure, then the core organizational structure had to be a machine of isolation. It had to be designed to reinforce that secrecy at all costs.
And the Order had these incredibly harsh foundational rules, all designed to eliminate any possible external loyalties, any emotional distractions.
Or personal ambitions, anything that could compromise the mission.
We see this right away in their recruitment policy, which, it tells you everything you need to know about their worldview.
Mm.
All members were explicitly orphans. They were taken in and raised by the Order. And this wasn't just a practical thing.
Not at all. It was a psychological foundation. By adopting children with no existing family ties, no memories of the outside world of Rayclast, they ensured that every single member's loyalty was purely internal.
They created an identity that was defined solely by duty.
Exactly, guaranteeing no loose ends. This wasn't just recruitment. It was a profound, systematic process of psychological conditioning, practically from birth. The goal was to create perfect, solitary vessels of duty. They had to eradicate the possibility of a conflicted identity entirely.
And the most explicit and frankly chilling structural rule, the one that really speaks volumes about the sacrifice required, is the rule of solitude.
No families, no loose lips, no loose ends.
And the sources are incredibly explicit. The rule forbid women ever feeling the touch of a man.
This takes that isolation mandate to its absolute extreme. This rule wasn't just about, preventing procreation, which would create a vulnerable lineage. It was about preventing connection.
Any connection.
Emotional, physical, social. They systematically sacrifice an entire dimension of human experience. Intimacy, love, familial comfort, all on the altar of their duty. They saw those connections as weaknesses.
Weaknesses that could be exploited.
Leading to the compromise of the world-ending secrets they guarded. It was a tactical decision.
So we have to analyze the sheer psychological cost of this. We're talking about a life of required solitude, enforced by the constant threat of instant death, and maintained for hundreds, maybe thousands of years.
How do you even maintain an organization like that, dedicated to such a profound duty, while actively stripping away every possible source of emotional support of human comfort?
Well, the Order clearly justified it as an absolute necessity, a life defined purely by secrecy and duty, because the stakes were just too high to allow for human weakness.
But that necessity creates this immense internal pressure, and June, our chronicler, gives us this subtle, almost heartbreaking glimpse of a crack in that ironclad code.
Right in the middle of describing the rigid rules against physical touch.
Yes. June mentions the rule against contact and then immediately adds, but it makes no mention of two women.
And here's where the forensic detail gets really, really interesting. It reveals the human undercurrents of the Order.
It does.
This small, almost parenthetical phrase about two women just rips a hole in the doctrine. It reveals this deep, unspoken tension and a potential loophole that June herself is acknowledging, maybe even celebrating in a way.
Well, given that it's Djinn telling the story, the ultimate keeper of secrets, and the mention of someone named Zana in the context of this specific rule, this phrase strongly implies a deeply personal relationship.
A relationship that developed despite the Order's isolationist policies.
It suggests that even the strictest institutional rules designed to create these perfect, emotionless guardians were ultimately subject to the complexity of human nature. The secrecy mandate was imposed on their bodies, but it failed to fully contain the needs of the soul.
It provides this essential relief from what is otherwise a just crushing picture of total isolation.
It really does.
But despite these incredibly severe internal rules, the Order was, functionally, global in its reach, in its mission. They pulled members from all across the disparate and often warring groups of Rayclast.
Yeah, we see this roll call of diverse origins. They adopted orphans from the Eternal Empire, the proud Marraketh, the seafaring Brynero.
The traditional Izamites, the tribal Karui, even the extremely isolated peak dwellers.
And that universality is crucial.
Why is it so important?
It demonstrates that the Order's mission guarding this world-ending power, it transcended all the political, tribal, and geographical conflicts that were constantly plaguing Rayclast. They weren't fighting for one nation or one philosophy.
They were fighting against existential threats.
Existential threats that demanded a unified, if secret, front. They were committed to adapting, to utilizing unique skills wherever they found them, whether that was a Brynero who could master lightning or a rejected peak dweller with some kind of cosmological vision.
So it proves the mission was considered universally necessary.
Even if the methods they used were probably universally despised had anyone known about them.
Okay, so now we transition from the abstract rules and the psychological cost to the concrete record of loss. The following records, they're not just names on a roster.
No, these are detailed accounts of duty, of sacrifice, and of the specific circumstances of failure that led to Junartoy being the last one standing.
We're tracing the individual arcs of tragedy.
And we've categorized these losses because they reveal different types of failures. There's the failure of research, the failure of defense, and maybe most importantly, the failure of judgment. Let's start with the agents who pursued knowledge they just could not control.
Right. Section 3A, the fatal pursuit of forbidden knowledge.
We begin with Suresh, the surgeon of the dead. His origins are instantly telling. He was such an outlier that he was rejected even by the already marginalized Faradin outcasts. But the Order saw something valuable there.
They actively sought out those with a capacity for darkness.
Yes, and Suresh's task was profound. He was dedicated to exploring the vast well of human darkness. He wasn't a soldier. He was a vital researcher into the most dangerous psychological and spiritual knowledge.
So he was trying to understand the motivation behind the dark arts so the Order could counter them?
Exactly. They were willing to delve into the very horrors they sought to suppress, viewing Suresh's unique, morally compromised perspective as a necessary resource for, let's call it, prophylactic defense.
But the record doesn't end with his findings. It ends with a warning.
A chilling, retrospective warning from the Order's own chroniclers. Remember that the price can sometimes exceed the value of knowledge. And that is a profound admission of a critical operational failure.
So Suresh's downfall, whatever it was.
It was a calculated risk that failed. It cost the Order a vital researcher, and it confirmed a terrifying reality. Some secrets, no matter how necessary for defense, should never be touched. They should never be studied too closely. The knowledge itself killed the knower.
Next, we have what might be the ultimate failure of record-keeping. The necromancer of Weeping Black.
Right. An agent whose work was so toxic, so volatile, that the Order actively tried to erase the evidence of his existence, even from their own history.
The text says his name, his ill-gotten knowledge, and his role in the Order shall be stricken from memory.
And this shows the extreme internal conflict they were dealing with. They knew they needed to record the failure for internal lessons, the cost of necromantic experimentation, but the knowledge itself was deemed too dangerous to commit to any lasting medium.
So they prioritized security over completeness. They believed that even just recording the name was a threat.
But the attempt at erasure failed. On a fundamental, practical level, it failed. The chronicler notes that the consequence of this failure remains tangible. It's a living, marching ruin.
His mindless legions remain scattered throughout Rayclast, with no master to curb their hunger.
The threat outlived the attempt to bury the mistake. The Order failed to contain both the knowledge and the disastrous external consequence. The cost of this one agent's ambition became a perpetual cleanup mission for all of Rayclast.
Okay, now let's talk about Ixchel, the God Stealer. Her story is just a painful escalation of mission failure.
It really is. She was pulled from a population that was going mad with fear, which suggests an early life exposed to some kind of massive psychological or cosmic trauma.
And her duty began with a delicate infiltration of the priesthood of Yomak to retrieve their sleeping form.
Which implies the Order routinely managed dormant divine entities. That was part of their job.
But her next task was this immediate and catastrophic escalation, the infiltration of the Temple of Chaos.
And you can see the calculation they made. The Order assumed that Chaos was a manageable, maybe dormant entity, just like the one she had just secured. They believed it could be contained or controlled.
And that was their fatal error, a fatal error in strategic calculation.
Absolutely. The final record of Ixchel is one of immense institutional remorse. It's a deeply emotional confession from the Order's leadership. They say, "It was our error, Ixchel Godstealer, that led to your fate."
The horrific truth they uncovered was that Chaos is not asleep, thus not a god.
It was active, aware, and completely unmanageable.
And what happened to Ixchel? What was her fate?
The realization of this active chaos led directly to her eternal suffering, which the Order acknowledges with our eternal remorse. They didn't just lose an agent. They were responsible for transforming their own agent into a captive, eternally suffering monument to their own strategic miscalculation.
They sought to steal a god, but they only succeeded in creating an eternal prisoner through their own hubris.
And the fallout was instant. It demanded a radical strategic pivot. The silent war between Order and Chaos, which the Order was presumably managing from the shadows, had to stop.
The stakes of Ixchel's failure forced a desperate and frankly contradictory alliance.
Right. The record notes the urgent political need for survival. Order and Chaos must ally against the coming tide. This single failure radically shifted the organization's entire strategic priorities, from calculated containment to outright desperate survival alongside a cosmic force they had just fundamentally misunderstood and antagonized.
Okay, so the Order's existence was defined by containing these powerful artifacts. But when containment failed, their defense shifted to absolute finality, and that's symbolized by a single legendary weapon, the Sealing Blade.
The Sealing Blade.
We have to look at the agonizing chain of individuals who created, bore, and delivered this last defense. This weapon was their last gasp.
We have to start with Egrin, the Void Speaker. He wasn't a traditional member at all. He was a necessary evil.
His own people, the Asmeri, had rejected him because his dark, corrosive visions had led them to a world abandoned by the Vol.
But the Order accepted him precisely because of his unique, contaminated insight. His critical, high-risk duty was to be the forger of the Sealing Blade.
And the tension surrounding Egrin is just palpable even in the formal records. They call him a speaker of unclean truths, and they explicitly curse him.
"We curse you whose soul echoes the madness of the void."
It's an incredible contradiction they had to swallow. They needed his dark vision, his intimacy with the void, with this corrosive indifference of cosmic non-existence, to forge the one weapon necessary for their ultimate defense.
Yet they utterly despised the source of his power. They despised the contamination of his soul. They needed corruption to maintain purity.
The consequence of that internal tension, though, was his redemption through a final violent act.
Right. The curse is explicitly lifted, but only by his unexpected sacrifice. This implies a sudden, necessary, and likely self-imposed end. An end required to neutralize the madness he embodied, or maybe to cleanse the deep spiritual contamination inherent in the weapon's creation.
So his life was spent making this terrible tool.
And his death was spent paying the soul debt owed for its existence.
The tool Egrin forged then passed to Batusha, the bearer. She was an orphaned eternal, defined by her unwavering loyalty.
Her early tasks included the requisition of dream artifacts, which shows her loyalty was immediately tested with these highly sensitive, non-physical objects that could work reality.
So that prepared her for the ultimate physical duty, becoming the bearer of the Sealing Blade.
She achieved high honor. The records mark her loyalty and her valor, but like every one of these fallen members, her story is defined by loss. The Order's survival was purchased by Batusha's sacrifice.
But the cost was profound. Her loss forever wounded the Order.
And that tells us her death wasn't just a military casualty. It was an emotional and strategic blow that guaranteed the organization's continued, crippled existence, but only by removing one of its most vital, trusted pillars.
And finally, the blade was transferred to Kianga, the Deliverer.
A unique individual, rejected by the Peak Dwellers but highly valued by the Order as a bold dreamer, whose soul speaks to the ineffable.
which suggests a rare mystical talent for understanding cosmic forces, for communication beyond the physical realm.
And her final role was the deliverer of the sealing blade to the Watchers.
This is the critical moment of last resort.
It is. She successfully completed her mission, taking the weapon forged by the cursed, borne by the loyal, and delivering it to this cryptic entity known only as the Watchers.
And her fate is just. It's this final, horrifying vision that closes her record.
Her half-drank life be troubled by nightmares of a chromic hunger no more. This implies she died, or passed on, having experienced the consuming, colorless void of true cosmic terror. She delivered the defense mechanism, but she was devoured by the experience.
You know, if we look at that chain of sacrifice, the forger, the bearer, the deliverer, it highlights the immense, agonizing effort invested in just one defensive measure.
It wasn't a clean, logical process. It was a desperate, bloody chain of responsibility where every hand that touched the blade was either cursed, wounded, or consumed.
Let's pivot now to the agents whose research or individual decisions directly triggered catastrophic external events. The failures that spread doom beyond the vault.
Right. Section 3C, the agents of inevitable calamity.
We start with Umid, the master researcher. He was rescued from being sacrificed to a volcanic god named Us.
Which immediately sets his life in the context of extreme, ritualistic, and elemental danger. His work focused on investigating Uf and these dangerous anomalies, specifically rifts in the boundaries of our reality.
So his research was clearly cutting edge, exploring the fundamental metaphysical boundaries of the world.
And his findings were so terrifying that his final act was an absolute decree for the world's survival.
Upon his death, Omid left a final, absolute commandment, a desperate plea for secrecy. The world must never know.
And that final command really emphasizes the desperate motivation of the Order in their last moments. Even when facing certain death, the priority has to be maintaining the secret. They believe knowledge itself is the primary vector for destruction.
But here is the profound consequence. This final commandment failed, almost immediately.
The Order could not contain the spread of the terrifying truth. The record states explicitly that the High Templar, a major political and religious leader in Rake class, saw the truth of their situation.
And his resultant fear will undo the world.
Let's just sit with that for a moment. This is a profound cascade failure. The secret was maintained for centuries, but its revelation to the wrong person. A powerful but fearful and reactionary political leader ensured global catastrophe.
So the source is telling us the threat isn't the power itself.
It's the fear of that power. The secret was more dangerous in the hands of the powerful and fearful than it was in the hands of the ignorant populace.
Next, we have Rathan, the one who intentionally contradicted the Order's core mission, leading to massive societal upheaval.
He was the first Brynnerot member, and he mastered the science of harnessing and controlling the power of lightning. He was charged with researching this volatile new energy source.
And this is arguably the moment of greatest internal contradiction in the Order's entire history. Their existence was defined by sealing away great power.
And yet, Rathan's discovery was intentionally released to civilization. The justification was recorded. His discovery was too important to keep locked away.
So they judged the immediate utility of the technology, maybe for societal defense or advancement, to outweigh the long-term existential risk of its existence. They effectively betrayed their foundational vow.
They tried to morally redeem the decision, stating, "Let him not be called Rathan the betrayer." But the result was immediate and grim, and it proved their founding principle correct all along.
The consequence was a catastrophic, rapid technological shift. The chronicler's observation upon his death reads like an immediate prophecy of doom for Rayclast's future.
Madness marches in machine form. Harnessed lightning, grim faces, and cold ambition abounds. Civilization will be its own undoing.
So Rathan's well-intentioned choice, the one time the Order prioritized utility over secrecy, led directly to a violent, industrialized, self-destructive future. It linked new technology inextricably with moral corruption and ambition.
And finally, we turn to Revna, the runesmith, whose death signals an insurmountable cosmological threat. She delved deep into mysteries in the past.
And her burial instructions were so precise and so desperate, laid to rest deep in a forest, forever hidden from the stars, which so terrified you in your final days.
That's chilling. Revna's terror of the stars and the secret she took to her grave. It points to a catastrophic external cosmic threat that the Order failed to counter.
Her final terror suggests she witnessed something inescapable, something so immense and uncaring that it overshadowed all human concerns. The Order couldn't fight it.
They can only try to hide the one person who knew about it.
And the final note on her record is the most despairing summary of the Order's structural failure. The loss of Revna is connected to an absolute lack of readiness.
Ancient evils stir. The stars watch, forever aloof, forever menacing. None remain who know the secret, so we are defenseless in the face of the unknown.
The specialist who understood the stellar threat is gone, and the secret knowledge required to defend the world against the cosmos is now permanently lost.
The ultimate failure is the loss of the defense mechanism before the threat even arrives.
The Order didn't just fall because of these huge calamitous events. It seems like they eroded over time, losing specialized experts who held this unique and irreplaceable knowledge.
Knowledge that was, in itself, a contained threat. We're watching the slow, painful loss of essential organizational superpowers. And that loss leads directly to the resurgence of the very threats they were founded to contain.
Let's consider Sume, the master lorekeeper. She was rescued from the desert, and her duty was investigating the mysterious duplication of artifacts, which is a profound existential threat to containment itself.
And she took a terrible secret to her grave.
What makes Sume's loss so uniquely devastating is the history attached to her knowledge. The record reveals that prior scribes, who couldn't cope with this same secret centuries earlier, burned the books in themselves aflame.
So now, centuries later, Sume dies, having successfully rediscovered this terrible truth, and the Order is left blind again. The consequence of losing a lorekeeper is having to repeat catastrophic history. It forces the sole survivors to investigate a centuries-old self-immolation just to relearn a threat they failed twice to contain.
The price of expertise is the inability to transfer it safely.
Then there is Naramoa, the second sight, a Karui casualty who mended his wounds and became bound by his code of service. He was an incredibly rare specialist. He focused on handling artifacts that actively subverted fate.
He was effectively the Order's control mechanism over destiny itself. He allowed them to navigate impossible situations.
So his loss instantly means the Order is subject to chaos and cosmic randomness. His service was centuries long, but upon his return to Hinakora, the deity of the dead in this mythology, the Order was left blinded and subject to the vagaries of fate.
They lost their ability to manipulate or counteract destiny,
which left them fully exposed to whatever cosmic forces dictated their end rather than allowing them to shape their own path.
We also lose Agnar, the Beastmaster, who rooted out the mysteries of wild artifacts. He was their connection to and control over the primordial wilderness.
He was pulled from the flames of feuding Izamites, a figure who could command respect from non-human entities. But the record says the first ones call back their favored son.
And the implication is immediate and severe. Without Agnar to manage those primordial entities, the first one's ravaging hunt brings them ever closer to Rayclast.
Losing the Beastmaster removed the critical firewall between the settled world and the chaotic, ancient entities of the wild. It guaranteed their inevitable return.
Rindwick, the Master Warrior, presents a unique and tragic case. He was an outlaw they took in, who proved his loyalty and led their martial defense for generations.
And he died of old age, which is a rare testament to his skill and longevity, a success story in a death-obsessed organization.
Yet even a natural death was a catastrophe for them.
Because that vacuum of strong martial presence led to immediate trouble on the ground. The consequence was that renegades rise once more. Their poisons threatened to cloud the land.
So the loss of their central protector invited local, manageable chaos brigands, localized war, poison back to the forefront. It proves that even maintaining the basic peace required the constant presence of their most elite agents.
And Tunen, the Blight Master, shows how specialized failure can be incremental but total. Rescued from the ocean, he led the war to eliminate a fungal plague that adapted every century cycle. He gave his life to successfully cleanse Rayclast.
But the sacrifice was temporary. It was undone by natural adaptation. The plague adapted, and now the critical blight heart that Dunan theorized must exist remains undiscovered.
Because none remain with the skill to see to its destruction. The specialist died, the plague learned, and the long-term containment failed completely, leaving the Order unable to finish the job he started.
Then there's Zarsk, the appeaser of spirits. Found broken in a flesh pit, his tortured soul attracted new kindred in kind, and he was tasked with appeasing anguished spirits, acting as a spiritual defense.
And though he was eventually swallowed by his own darkness, he saved countless others through his duty. His loss means a missing element of defense against the tormented and restless dead, exposing the world to spiritual malice.
And finally, Deacon Eutychus. His story represents the ultimate violent structural failure of large-scale reconnaissance and ambition.
Eutychus was the Order's hand in the chamber, granted access to a mysterious domain they lacked the resources to explore.
His fate, alongside the men under Cardinal Sanctus Fox, served as a terrible lesson.
Let none dare the domain, lest they too feed that vile hunger eternal. The ambition to explore beyond their means had a catastrophic, world-altering consequence. The passage between Rayclast and the land beyond time's reach was torn open.
So this single reckless expedition led directly to the precipice of eternal war.
And the final lament on his record confirms the functional death of the organization. No one remains to hold us back. This forensic detail is just crushing. Every single death, whether by sacrifice, dark knowledge, adaptation, or cosmic disaster, removed a specific vital cog in the machine,
Ensuring the entire world became exposed to a new lethal threat.
You know, if we synthesize this entire overarching narrative, we see so clearly that the Order was not defeated by one single invasion or one massive cataclysmic battle.
Yeah.
It was defeated by a long series of inevitable internal contradictions and cascading necessary sacrifices. Their demise was often driven by the very knowledge they sought to contain: Omid's secret, Wraithen's technology, Ixchel's eternal suffering.
They were destroyed, ironically, by the absolute necessity of their own mission and the human toll it exacted.
They existed solely to be secret, but the demands of their mission forced them into these existential risks, like using the mad, contaminated vision of Agrin to forge a weapon, or releasing the destructive power of Wraithen's lightning.
These calculated risks eventually just overwhelmed the institution entirely. They were constantly making the choice between two catastrophic outcomes.
So if we look at the immediate consequences set in motion by this long, slow death, they're staggering, and they are happening now in the present of this narrative.
Okay, first, their ultimate defense, the sealing glade, was deployed in a desperate measure, but the bearer and the deliverer were both sacrificed and lost, which means that critical defense system is now either unguarded, unstable, or gone entirely.
Second, the most dangerous technology harness, lightning, and the resulting machine form madness has been fundamentally unleashed upon civilization. This guarantees its own undoing through cold ambition and technological hubris. It's replaced ancient threats with industrialized ones.
Third, the High Templar now knows the terrifying truth Omid died to protect, and his fear is guaranteed to undo the world. The threat is no longer contained power, but a political catastrophe fueled by panicked overreaction from the world's most powerful leaders.
And finally, the most critical secrets: Sume's terrible duplication mystery, Egrin's void madness, Revna's star terror, and Dunan's blightheart are all permanently lost with their keepers. This leaves the sole survivor, Djinn or Toy, completely defenseless, blind, and alone against ancient stirring evils and cosmic malice.
The final harrowing truth of this chronicle is that the Order of the Djinn succeeded spectacularly in its primary goal, keeping itself and the world's greatest dangers a secret for countless generations.
But in doing so, they ensured that when they finally failed, one individual sacrifice at a time, no one else on Rayclast was prepared, informed, or equipped to step in.
Djinn's solitary confession is the final, desperate act of a broken duty. The secret is only being told because the silence has become lethal. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary and truly painful chronicle of the Order of the Djinn.
You know, the Order believed the greatest power was the one nobody knew existed. And they sacrificed everything: love, family, even their own sanity, to maintain that necessary secret. But if the only way to safeguard the world is through absolute, solitary secrecy, we have to ask the final, provocative question. Is a dangerous truth shared, allowing others to prepare and counter the threat, still safer than a necessary secret that dies forever with its keeper, leaving everyone else completely unprepared for the inevitable flood? Think about that as you face the coming tide.